The two patterns in this video coming up. One, all of my heavy pieces, the two rooks and the queen, are all hitting on different files. Right now, it's not a game about attacking our opponent, it's about attacking squares. And so each of my heavy pieces is hitting on different squares. That's the first pattern. Now, the second pattern is this pawn structure. This pawn structure is almost 100% strong. And so if you take away two things from this video, one, the heavy pieces are all hitting on different squares. Two, this pawn structure is a cheat code. And so enjoy the video. What is White's biggest positional advantage in this position? Well, we have a passed pawn here, right? There's no black pawn in front of this pawn on b5. And so down the road, our pawn can turn into a queen, right? Now, the second benefit of this passed pawn is that just the threat of it becoming a queen forces black to invest their resources protecting against that. And while black is investing their resources on this side of the board, white will be able to start playing on the other side of the board. The second thing is that in the endgame, he's always going to have one piece guarding against this pawn. And so this passed pawn is the most beneficial thing in white's position right now. Now, what is the worst aspect of white's position right now? Well, the pieces are a bit cramped, right? This bishop really has nothing going for it. It's in the same line as the queen. They're on the same diagonal, but there's no real attack. Maybe down the road we're hitting on a6, which is a benefit. But really, where our rook is, we really want our knight to be there. And when our knight's there, we're hitting on the blocker of our pawn. Once this knight's gone, now the pawn is open headway. And also, here's a black weak pawn on d6. This is a weak pawn. So not only is the knight hitting the knight on b6, it's also hitting the d6 square, right? And so this is a really good square for the knight. It's important to understand, just because we can take their knight does not mean we take their knight, right? Because as soon as we take the knight, now we've lost our force that's pressuring the forward squares of our pawn. And now basically we've locked in a blockade against our pawn. And so we'd rather just keep our knight here and keep the tension, right? Because now his knight can never move, because then we're going to push the pawn. And so instead of trading off just because we can, we want to keep the tension and always make him feel the force of our knight, right? So it's very important not to trade this knight. But right now our rook is in that square. And so the rook is what's cramping in this bishop. So moving this rook is giving us a lot of benefits. It's opening up our bishop. It's allowing space for our knight to get to a juicier square. And look at what we can do, right? So where should we move this rook? This rook is the bane in our position. Now, some of you might think, we should just go back to c1. Also, this bishop is hitting on the c3 square, so maybe that's going to scare us away from c3. But no, this is the positional pattern you take away from this video. When we put our rook on c3, look at our heavy pieces, our rooks and our queen. They each have their own rank. And so right now, when you're attacking, you obviously want your rooks to be connected, when you're in the enemy's outpost and hitting on the 7th rank. But when you're just in a positional game, you're attacking squares, not pieces. And since you're attacking squares, you want to attack as many squares as possible and have your pieces least tied down to each other as possible. And so all of our heavy pieces are perfectly coordinated. When I played this move, I felt like Napoleon. I felt like I was an amazing general of my army. And so you should really be feeling your pieces out, right? And if you look down the road, this rook on a3 never moves the whole game. And you'll see down the road, this pawn actually becomes a bit of a weakness, right? And look, because we played a smart positional move of putting all of our pieces on our heavy pieces on different files, each attacking their own squares, this piece never became a weakness. And down the road, we were able to push this pawn, because you see black is trying to make play for himself, but his pieces are now gone from the passed pawn, and we can just promote. Now, a second positional tip, if you stayed this far into the video, this is something you can take into many games, is this pawn structure. This is a very strong pawn structure in almost any position. It's very powerful in the endgame because it kind of gives you an outpost where you can move your king and hide it from pieces. So in the endgame, this pawn on the diagonal near the edge is very strong. And also in the middle game. Now, why is it very strong? Down the road, we could play h5, right? And what does h5 do? h5, if black takes on h5, now this outpost becomes, there's no pawns hitting the outpost, and now we can get our knight in there potentially down the road, right? And now black's pawn structure is weak. And so we're always one move away from really hitting on black's pawn structure. Now, another thing is that it's opening, our rook. Because this pawn is on h4, we have a square for the rook. We're always going to be able to hit on that square now. Now, you'll see that down the road, the bishop is now on h3, right? Look at another technique of this rook, is that if we push this pawn, now our rook is on this bishop on h3, right? And earlier he had his queen on h3, and we're threatening some tactics. If he keeps his queen on h3, eventually our rook is going to hit on that. So you can see how this positional pattern of getting all of our heavy pieces onto different squares really is paying dividends throughout the game. And so these are the two positional patterns you should take away, is that this pawn structure setup is almost 100% good. And at lower levels especially, I'm sure you guys know, your opponents just love to push all their pawns near your king. This is a very good setup against that. So if you take away anything from this video, understand these positional patterns. When you're looking for a move and you can't find one, maybe feel out your position, feel out your heavy pieces, feel out your pieces, and try to get each of them attacking different squares. Now, when you start attacking, you want to pile up. But in a lot of positions, you're not attacking the enemy, you're attacking the squares of the board.